The Devil's Plan is a Korean Netflix reality game show, and I'm going to tell you about the game that they play in the first couple episodes called The Virus Game. The contestants on this reality show have a really interesting mix of backgrounds that just immediately told me that the level of play that we would see here would probably be a lot more sophisticated than on most of these game shows. One contestant on this show is an actual scientist. Another one, a YouTuber with over 1 million followers. Another one is a woman who majored in mathematics at MIT. So did I, by the way. Another contestant is a professional Go player. And another is a woman who is a TV personality and who had over 5,000 people attend her wedding, which shows how networking and social oriented she is. And another guy is a professional gamer who specialized in StarCraft and poker. In The Devil's Plan, these contestants are competing in a series of games where each one gives them a chance to win a certain kind of currency. I'm just going to tell you about the game that they played in the first couple episodes called The Virus Game. And I think this game really caught all of them off guard. The very first game that they have to play is very complicated, and it takes a long time for the show to explain the rules to the audience and to the players. I'm not saying that it was a bad idea for the show to have chosen such a complicated game. I think it's actually really interesting, and it shows a kind of respect for the viewer that I don't see in most American reality TV shows. The Virus Game is a social deduction game like Mafia or Werewolf that you might be familiar with. I'm not going to go through all the rules, but I'm going to give you just a super quick version so you can get a sense of basically how the game works. The game is played over a series of rounds, and before the first round, each player randomly gets an identity or a role. 2 of the players get the role terrorist, and their objective is to kill everyone else. Each terrorist does get to know who the other terrorist is at the beginning, so that's an advantage that they have. The terrorists have a few special moves they can do. The main one they can do is infect any other player with a virus. If they get infected, then 2 rounds later, they'll die. But also 1 round later, their infection will then spread to the 2 players who have a number that's adjacent to theirs. Each player has a different number. So if number 7 got the virus, then it would mean that number 6 and number 8 would get infected next round. Each terrorist also has 1 bullet. So that means 1 time throughout the game, they can just kill any other player. And each terrorist has an antidote, which they can use to make themselves or anybody else immune to the virus. I think for 1 round, I'm not sure on that. A bunch of other players have the role of just regular citizen. And so they're trying to survive all this, and they win if the terrorists are eliminated. Some other players on the citizen side also have some special roles. They're not just ordinary citizens. So one of them is the journalist, and each round, the journalist can determine the true role of any one player. So it's incredibly powerful information that the journalist has access to. The officer is able to use 1 bullet each round to just kill any other player. Another special role on the citizen side are the researchers. There's 2 of them. And sort of like how the terrorists work, where the terrorists get to know each other, the 2 researchers also get to know each other at the beginning of the game. The researchers' special power is that once per round, they can analyze any other player. And when they do that, they learn if that player has antibodies. Now, there's only 1 player in the game who has antibodies, and no one knows who they are. Even that player themselves doesn't know who they are. But if the researchers can find that player, then they can start a process which takes 2 rounds, and they will develop a cure to the virus. After the first round of developing the cure, everybody gets to hear that that is happening. And then after the second round, if they actually really develop the cure, then their side wins. The whole civilian side, that is, but the researchers get some bonus points in this case. And the other role is kind of a wild card role. It's the fanatic. The fanatic gets more points in the overall game the sooner that they themselves die. So the fanatic actually wants to die as soon as possible. At this point, in order to really talk about what happens, I'm going to have to give spoilers for these first couple episodes. You might not care about the spoilers if you just want to hear the interesting and honestly pretty unexpected turns of events that happen. I'll just tell you the highlights. So here we go. The first thing I have to say is about the player who played the journalist. The journalist is an incredibly important role in this game because the journalist can determine the true identity of each of the players. If given long enough, they can do it once per round. So they're absolutely vital to the civilians to figure out who the terrorists are and to try to work together with the officer to shoot the two terrorists. And likewise, that means they are the biggest threat to the terrorists. So the journalist has to especially care about not letting anyone know that they are the journalist. But what the journalist player actually did was just immediately tell someone, hey, I'm the journalist, and then another person and another person. And at that point, it's over. Everybody knows, of course. Now, there was a plus to this move and a minus. I think the minus is way bigger than the plus, but I'll point out what they are. The plus is that because everybody knew that she was the journalist, the information of who actually is a terrorist that someone was able to figure out did flow to her. It really did reach her. And then she really did use her once per round power to check if that person was a terrorist and found out that, yeah, they are the terrorist. And then because she's very open about being the journalist, she told everyone who the terrorist was and people believed her. So the plus here is that she was really effective in the short term, in the course of just one round, in finding and exposing the terrorist. The minus is that it was an incredibly stupid thing to do because predictably she's going to be killed right away by the terrorists, and she was. So she was immediately eliminated. But now let's get to the scientist. And when I say the scientist, I don't mean that that's one of the roles. I mean that in real life, he's a scientist. And on this show, he constantly talks about science to everyone. Anyway, I thought maybe he won't be the best at actually playing this competitive game, but he really impressed me with how he played the virus game. In this kind of social deduction game, there's usually one team that has a lot of players and another team that just has a few players, but they have some advantage, which is how the terrorists work here. And in this type of game, everybody just claims that they're a member of the bigger team at the beginning, whether they are or not. So it's kind of useless to ask, like, what team are you on? Because everyone gives the same answer. What's really valuable is that if you are on the bigger team, if you can make some moves that actually prove that you must be. And I think the scientist pulled this off. I think he was working so hard on behalf of the citizens that it pretty much proved that he had to be a citizen. The very first thing that he suggests at the beginning of the whole game is that all 12 players, and remember, they are numbered 1 through 12, and that's how the virus can spread. If it goes to number 7, then the virus is going to spread to the adjacent numbers of 6 and 8. He says that all 12 players should physically change how they're standing to stand in a circle in order so that we can all see what's what. And even though that's a small thing, that is trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. And I don't think that one of the terrorists would do that. The terrorists want as much confusion and chaos as possible. So he gets everyone to stand in order in a circle. And then he says something that was really surprising to me and I hadn't even thought about. He was talking about the method that each of these roles has to use physically, logistically, in order to do their special move. This was not actually told to us in the rules at the beginning. What I mean is that the two terrorists, they have a move where they can infect someone with a virus, and they have a move where they can shoot someone once per game. But how do they do those moves? I assumed wrongly that at the end of the round or something, all the players would be isolated in 12 different chambers and they'd enter their moves. But that is not how it works. During the round, when they're all kind of milling around in these series of interconnected rooms, somewhere in there, they're supposed to do something, some kind of move that signals that they've done their special move. So what the scientist was saying was that if we all stand in this circle, all looking at each other, and we don't move, and we just let the whole clock run out, then there's not going to be any way to do any moves. And that means there's not going to be any way for the terrorists to infect anyone with a virus. So what he says is he proposes that we all just do that. Nobody makes a move. Everybody watch everybody the whole time. And furthermore, he says that if anyone doesn't like this plan, then they're a terrorist. I think this is an amazing plan, and it was a breath of fresh air, and it showed some incredible strategic thinking way above anything we've seen in other Netflix reality game shows such as Squid Game: The Challenge or The Trust. There is one weakness in the plan that the scientist suggested, but I know that he knows this. It was actually part of his plan. If everyone went along with his plan, it would be true that the terrorists wouldn't be able to spread the virus and they wouldn't be able to win. But it is also true that the civilians wouldn't be able to do their plan either. They wouldn't be able to use the officer in order to shoot the two terrorists or figure out who they are. And the researchers wouldn't be able to develop a cure. So actually, if we follow his plan, neither side wins. Neither side loses, but nobody wins. But the genius part of this, and the thing that I know he was relying on, was the framing of how he said the plan. Because he said that if you are a terrorist, then you should be against this plan. And the rules of this game are like pretty elaborate and pretty confusing. Not everyone was instantly on the same page. Not everyone instantly realized that the end condition would be that it's like a tie or a push if we do his plan. So I think people's gut reaction, their initial reaction, is guided by the framing of the way he said that. He said, if you're against this plan, then you must be one of the terrorists. And the whole reason that he said any of this was just to look at everybody's reactions to see who got real uncomfortable when he said that. It turns out we didn't go along with his plan at all. And right away, people are walking all over the main room into adjacent rooms, etc. But I think he got what he needed. I think he saw the reaction that he needed to see. He noticed the reaction of one woman that seemed very suspicious to him. And then just a few moments later, that woman took him aside to talk to him in private. And she linked arms with him as she did so. So putting those two clues together, he suspected that she's probably a terrorist. And even more interesting than that, he said that strategically, whoever the terrorist is, they have an incentive to infect someone on the opposite side of the circle as them, so that when the virus spreads from player to player, it takes longer to get to them so that they don't have to use their antidote to save themselves. And that this woman, the suspicious woman, the one who took him aside and maybe infected him, was exactly opposite him. So now that's 3 pieces of information that are all pointing that maybe it's her. Another move that you have in this game is that you can test yourself to see if you have the virus, but you can only do that once per game. And he said out loud to everyone, I think she is a terrorist for all of these reasons that I've just told you. And furthermore, if I go test myself right now and it turns out that I have the virus, it really solidifies my theory and she's probably the terrorist. Now, if it turns out that I don't have the virus, I'm totally wrong and I don't know what to think, but that's why it's worth it to do this test. He did have the virus and he accused her. Very well played, Science Guy. So it turns out the first person eliminated was the journalist who let everyone know that she was the journalist. So this terrorist woman killed her, but then the terrorist was eliminated next. The next set of things I'm going to tell you is kind of an interwoven mess, but it's hilarious. So I think it's worth hearing about. First, there's Guillaume, the professional StarCraft player. So he appears to be a total idiot and clueless as to what's going on. Then there's the YouTuber who is actually extremely on the ball and very aware of everything going on, both strategically and socially. And he points out that after the first round, the officer apparently didn't kill anyone, because at that point in time, the only person eliminated was the journalist. And there's no way that the officer killed the journalist. Obviously, the terrorist killed the journalist. So who did the officer kill? Nobody. And why would the officer do that? And the YouTuber argues that only an idiot who doesn't understand how the rules of the game work would choose to not kill anyone. So he says, who here is so clueless and understands the game so little that they even could be the officer? And he says, it's the StarCraft guy. The player Dong Jae is a student. And what's notable is that some of the people on this show were just chosen by the producers to be on it. But there was also an open test where anyone could apply to be on it. And he got in that way. And he's one of the only 2 contestants to have a perfect score on that test. Dong Jae acts suspicious and weird during the whole virus game. And he acts like he's taking things really personally and doesn't understand the difference between a competitive game and the real world. Like these accusations are about his integrity or whatever. He's sort of hot-headed and a little rude. And he's obviously the other terrorist. ? So this whole thing looks like it's a done deal, like it's game over. The civilians only need to kill the 2 terrorists. That's it. And one of them is already dead. And we've already figured out that the StarCraft guy is the only one dumb enough to be the officer. So apparently he has the ability to shoot the other terrorists. And looks like Dong Jae is the other terrorist. So all we've got to do is get him to shoot Dong Jae. Game over. That's the main thing that most of the players talked about during that round. But then it turns out, incredibly surprisingly, that the player eliminated is actually one of the 2 researchers. So what the heck? How could that even have possibly happened? So some of the players go to the StarCraft guy and say, hey, what are you doing? Why didn't you shoot Dong Jae? You shot like this other person who's a researcher. Why would you do that? And he's generally very shifty. And there's many conversations where he literally does not even answer or say a single word. And he looks incredibly stressed out the whole time. But on this one, he said, oh, yeah, I killed that person. What's wrong with that? What? He's the researcher? What? Are you sure? I didn't know that. And people can't believe it. They say, how could you possibly not know that? Like, we've all been talking about that the whole time. Why would you shoot the wrong guy? But the thing is, he's overplaying his hand here. What he did was so stupid that now we realize, oh, this is beyond stupid. He is just the terrorist. Each terrorist has one bullet. So he actually just uses one bullet to kill the researcher. And I guess he isn't the officer after all. He's a terrorist. Then a little bit later, other people have other questions for the StarCraft guy. And it's just such a mess. At one point, someone asked like, hey, didn't you say X thing at X time? And he's like, yes. And then they're like, well, but wasn't that wrong later though? So did you just lie to us? And he's like, oh, yes. So now he's actually reached a new level. At first, we thought he was so clueless that he had to be the officer, but then he was too clueless, so he had to be the terrorist. But now he's a whole other level of clueless beyond that. And the only way to explain that is if he's the fanatic, the player who just wants to die. He's saying like conflicting things that would basically make anyone mad, whether they were the terrorists or the civilians. So I guess we were wrong again, and he's the fanatic. And this brings us back to Dong Jae. Remember that earlier in this sequence, it really seemed like Dong Jae was obviously one of the terrorists, but the only reason that we stopped thinking that it was him was because it seemed like the StarCraft guy must be the terrorist. But then the StarCraft guy revealed layers and layers of whatever he really is, and he isn't the terrorist anymore. So I guess it really is Dong Jae. By now, we've long since known who the real officer is, the one who's able to shoot one person per round. And that real officer is about to make what could be the final move of the game by shooting Dong Jae. But just before he does, he talks to Dong Jae, and Dong Jae's like, hey man, you want to really think about what you're doing here. And he spins a story about how maybe some other random girl is the terrorist. And she's like, hey, come on, who's been sowing discord this whole time, Dong Jae? It's been you. And now you're just doing it again, trying to throw it on me. It's so transparent, like it's obviously you. He manages to spin enough doubt that he actually gets the officer to shoot someone else instead. And I thought, wow, that's an incredible maneuver that Dong Jae has pulled off by getting the officer to shoot some other person. But it's all going to be for nothing anyway, because the officer is then going to see that that was the wrong person. He's going to shoot Dong Jae, and the game's over anyway. And now I'm going to reveal the exciting conclusion to the virus game. And kind of the whole reason I'm telling you this story is that the officer does realize, oh, I guess I screwed up, but it must be Dong Jae. And then he does shoot Dong Jae the next round. But it turns out Dong Jae wasn't the terrorist after all. And this ending actually feels like the ending of a murder mystery, like when Poirot gives his speech about how he solved the whole thing. When Dong Jae is eliminated, we learn that he's actually the fanatic. And that doesn't, at first glance, make any sense. It doesn't make sense for two reasons. One, because his own incentive is to die as soon as possible, but he was not playing in a way to die as soon as possible. And two, his actions actually caused the terrorists to win. He was able to stall things long enough that the virus killed everybody. Both of those things are against his interests. So how does any of this make sense? And it all goes back to the very beginning. It actually is a detail we saw, and I didn't think anything of it at the time, before the game started and before anyone had seen what their roles were. Dong Jae talked to the woman who would later end up being the first terrorist to be eliminated. But again, at this point, nobody has any roles. So he's talking to her, and he says, hey, why don't we work together and reveal our roles to each other no matter what they are? And at the time I thought, well, what a stupid thing to say, because what if it turns out their roles are conflicting? Then they're not going to do it. And it's not going to mean anything. But this is where Dong Jae made an incredibly smart calculation. And it's something that I miscalculated. What he was banking on is that the value of being a winner in this virus game, which is only one game in the series of the Devil's Plan show, that the value of winning that would actually be smaller than the value of having a solid alliance. So what I didn't realize is that when he was making that deal with her, he absolutely meant it. And she got eliminated very early. She was the second person, but he played on her behalf the whole time. He was playing to make the terrorists win. It was an incredibly lucky combination. And he happened to draw the role of fanatic, but then make a deal with someone who was terrorist. and also for the other terrorist to be the StarCraft guy whose whole strategy was to play as dumb as possible. So when you have someone playing really dumb, you can't quite tell if they just don't know how the game works or if they're a terrorist or if they're the fanatic. And then you have the cover of the real fanatic playing in a way where the incentives don't make any sense. It was incredibly hard to solve this. I wonder if even Poirot could figure it out. So there you go. Great play by the scientist who's named Orbit, by the way. Great play by Guillaume, who seemed like a total idiot, but actually knew exactly what he was doing. And great play by Dong Jae, who made a better calculation than I would have made in his place. It's fun to see a real game with solid rules and some pretty good players playing it. And if you'd like to play any of the pretty good games I've designed, you can check out my tabletop games at serlingames.com. You might check out Flash Duel in particular because there's one of many modes in that game where you can play with a traitor.